Welcome to Grit with Wisdom. This is the podcast that delves deep into the inner psyche of mountain bikers from all aspects of our sport in order to discover the tools and the tactics that can help us have more fun out on the trails more often. Our aim here is to help you understand what it takes to push our own personal boundaries in the sport we love from a mental and emotional perspective. Today on the podcast, I'm sitting down post-ride here in Squamish with Michael Sousa. Many of you local listeners may recognize the name, as Mike is active in the Whistler and Greater Sea to Sky communities as a stoked mountain biker, an instructor, a guide, a filmmaker, and then many other talents as well. I'm super excited to have him here today because after almost 20 years of honing his mountain biking skills on the steep, deep, technical trails of Whistler, he's dedicated this past summer to learning tricks in the air on a mountain bike. And as adults, I'm sure this is something we can all agree on. This takes a certain amount of courage and self-will. As well as this recent personal exploration, Mike recently gained his level 3 PMBIA coaching qualification, which for those who aren't aware is kind of like the gold standard of instructor training and no easy feat. So loads of personal and professional development of late, and I can't wait to unpack the mindset behind that. Mike, hey. Welcome to the show.
Hey man, glad to be here. I'm stoked, grateful for the opportunity.
No, it's awesome to have you here. We've just been out for a fantastic ride here in Squamish. The dirt's grippy. We rode a bit of everything. We've got some gap jumps, some skinnies. It was at the end.
It was pretty full on. It was cool to like come back to some of those trails that when I would ride Squamish more often, and that I remember from back in the day, and they're kind of like modern, but they're still there, like those kind of gap lines that I like to ride, and haven't done them in a while. And then like throwing in a few mix, like do some berms, some burly, steep, rocky stuff. It was great. It was a good time.
Yeah, man, it was so cool. Just like getting to hang out and get a bit of a sense of like how you operate. Like, I kind of threw you in the deep end there and said, "Hey, can you go first? I'm going to film this." You hadn't ridden these trails in years, but it was really cool to see like even just that honed in process of like, okay, we're gonna send it a little bit here, but we still, we still looked at things, we broke it down.
Totally. No, I was glad you're up for it. That's the first time we're riding, right? But I was kind of like, oh, like, if you're asking me what I like, I'd like to come back to these. It also gives me a good excuse to like, it's quite often I'll want to ride stuff like that, but also I'm not someone who really likes to ride alone that often. Like, it doesn't happen very often. Like to like have people around, keep stoke up and stuff. But I'm not gonna push somebody to ride something they don't want to ride. So I was kind of like, I'll throw it out there, and then if you want to do some more like slabby, let's do that. So I was stoked when you want to do that. I was like, let's do it.
Man, it was perfect because I've hit some of those jumps before, but not all of them.
Yeah,
so
I was
like, great, I'm gonna have Mike tow me down some of these jumps today, which you did a fantastic job of. Hey, look, I think it would be really cool to start here for some of the listeners that haven't already met you out on the trails. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about kind of where you grew up and when bikes first came into your life.
Yeah, sure. I guess like I was saying to you before, where I'm kind of a bit of the typical Whistler story where you come out for like a ski season and you just never find yourself going home. Home was Toronto, and I grew up pretty much in the heart of the city. It was pretty dense, like skyscrapers all around kind of thing, and so I grew up skateboarding before any of this bike stuff. There wasn't really any much for trails or anything like that, and it was kind of outside of what I even knew existed. But then it was through skateboarding that I discovered snowboarding, and then it was in snowboarding I moved to the local ski hill at home, and it was around there where I figured out. I mean, I had mountain bike before this move, but like just kind of tinkered like through the trees on some department store, kind of that much travel maybe on the front and hardtail on the back. But I wouldn't really mountain bike, no jumps or none of that kind of stuff. And then it was after living on the ski resort and doing the snowboarding thing over there where I was kind of like, okay, there's this summer thing they do with the mountain bike trails and stuff. Like I've ridden in the woods on my bike and tried that a bit. And then kind of picked it up in the city looking for the trails that did exist, discovered there was some trail system. There were mountain bikers in the city, but it was pretty minimal. And I was kind of drawn towards pretty quickly kind of got bored of I guess it was very like up and down cross country kind of single tracky stuff. And I wanted that same thrill of like flying through the air, going fast turns and stuff like I get with the snowboard. And so I found myself looking for that kind of feature stuff, finding skinnies, like anything elevated made of woodwork was the only thing that was like features on our trails in the city, and like jumps. The jumps were kind of dirt jumps, and had no idea how to jump that with a mountain bike that was like, again, from like a department store or whatever, like a Walmart kind of bike, and just goofing around there. That's how I kind of got into it, but didn't really get into it till I moved here. I moved here in 2007, chasing snowboarding, and then the mountain biking was just a natural thing. I had tinkered with it in the city. I had already seen like videos and stuff of what mountain biking was here. So it was only natural that like as soon as I decided I was gonna stay past that winter season, I'm gonna pick up a mountain bike, and yeah, it's been the time ever since.
Yeah, dude, that must have been a fantastic moment, kind of being like, after, trying it out in the city and kind of doing it to now living in Whistler and just being immersed in snowboarding and
Yeah,
the mountain biking culture.
yeah, it really was a trip. I mean, it like almost kind of sounds even cliche to say, but like it is that like you get a sense of what it is on camera or whatever. This is like back in like drop-in TV days, and it's like VHS tapes of the for those of you who don't know, drop-in TV, some old like you should know free NWD, New World Disorder, like the drop-in TV. Those were the kind of the videos that were out and popular. This was like early 2000s was when I was discovering mountain biking, mid 2000s moving out here, and yeah, like that kind of stuff, that kind of scene. It was very like free ride, very like similar to like the whole punk rock thing. Like, oh, you had your own little community outside of the norm stuff. Like that was the appeal. Like that's kind of the same thing that drew me to skateboarding and snowboarding. Was like living in the city was just too like hustle bustle and this and that, and it was such a nice space to be. So yeah, the mountain biking at that time felt very like rock and roll. It was young, it was wild, people hucking themselves off stuff. And while I was still very much in like the early stages, I wasn't exactly there. The desire to want that was there, and I remember like kicking my feet off down A line and doing no footers like pretty early on and stuff. It was like if I try and find photos of that stuff, it looks so goofball, and it's like all the wrong techniques, and like landing on the seat with your feet blown off on these like bikes with just all the T-Rex bars, all the old attributes of old school. Totally. But it was such a time, man. Yeah, it's very different Whistler that exists today, but it was cool. It was rad.
Oh man, that sounds like such a time. And back then, like, what was the first thing that kind of grabbed you, or what was your why to like really wanting to mountain bike and wanting to be part of that scene?
I think it was that I was kind of touching on. It's like that I didn't feel like team sports or any kind of like organized like, recreational stuff that was more team. It didn't really feel all that inviting in the same way. Like, I mean, growing up, I tried, in school you're on the soccer team or baseball team, typical stuff, whatever, growing up. None of them were really like something where it was like, going to soccer practice. I did like some hockey a little bit, like street hockey, not like ice hockey, but all that stuff just felt like, it's what you do as a kid. But none of them I was like, oh yeah, like can we go play hockey again? Like when we're not it was kind of just like, like it's the day for that. And it was, I had friends doing that stuff and it was cool. But the thing that like the same with the skateboarding and the snowboarding and what eventually led to the mountain biking, any one of those, it's like when things don't work out or in the process of like learning things and getting better or getting to new places with your mountain bike in this case, or skis or snowboard or whatever, you like if in that process you can't quite get there, you're finding challenges, like there's no one to kind of blame. Like that's something that stuck out with me and I really liked. Like I didn't like in the team sports, it was, especially when you're young, kind of like pass the ball or like some of that stuff, you're like, bro, I was right there, I'm open, and like that kind of stuff, you can't do that. Like it's all, and so I think there was like a discipline that comes through that, and respect for the learning process and excitement when you do get it. It's like more valuable. And I mean, I describe it now in that way with the hindsight that I have now, working with all the coaching stuff or whatever. Like, so I was naive to like why it was that at the time. All I knew was that it felt super great, and I met this community that I could relate to, that was like rock and roll and like fly through the air, and like it's an expression, right? Like you can be, I love that you can carve it up and play around, and I've always in anything that I've done, whether it's the skateboarding, the snowboarding, and the mountain biking, it's always come from like a desire to like fly and play with the like physics of it a little bit. It's almost like dancing with gravity you know, especially when you get into that thousands of hours kind of zone. Man, like, I mean, I could ramble on and on, but like lately it's been a little bit of that with because I work as a snowmobile guide in the winter, and I've been picking up moto in the last like 3 years, and incorporating a throttle into all that has just been this like a whole nother paradigm kind of almost to just add another element of like input and like understanding how you can take gravity, momentum, and air, like all that kind of stuff, and harness it and like play with it.
Use that input to affect the other three.
Yeah,
like,
so cool.
I think a common theme here, we're going to talk loads more about this, but is having, I guess, like the courage to keep throwing yourself again and again into that beginner stage where you're like, hey, now I've got this throttle, I know nothing about it. This is awesome. And I'd love to hear you speak on that feeling you get when you are in that beginner stage and everything's new, you're learning.
Yeah, it's funny actually that you bring that question. It's a good question. I think it's been more a desire since getting into the coaching side of things. Like once it became my gig or my career to do this, and then through that like became more passionate through it, it was almost like it was just more appealing to not only understand the client that I'm coaching, but also like a little bit to some degree like envious of that like naive factor or that discovery place, at least with mountain biking, because by the time that I had been taking up coaching for the first time, I'd been riding long enough that I felt pretty proficient on most trails. And while I still felt like plenty of times where I'd be scared or pushing my limit, it wasn't frequent enough to where I was like, whoa, you know? And so it was like through vicariously like feeling the client's experience that I got to experience all those early stage things. And then this desire to kind of chase that, say in the off season with a new sport that it can't be mountain biking or like other things, because the mountain biking, it was tricky to get that without getting into a really risky situation or even just making the time, because I think part of that was like riding new trails, so I'd have to go to a new spot or something like that.
Totally.
Yeah,
I love that idea, and I think this is a really good rabbit hole we could go down, and probably an important one. So I know a lot of mountain bikers struggle with that same thing of like, hey, I've been riding for 5 or 10 years, I'm really proficient at this, but I'm missing that feeling of progression, of getting better. I want to keep getting better, but I don't want to put the risk through the roof. I don't want to hurt myself. I know you found some, really creative, really cool ways of getting that same feeling and pushing yourself still within the realm of biking. I'd love to hear you speak on that.
I guess to get a little more creative, or to kind of push without feeling like you're putting yourself in a risky situation. At least as of late, it's been coming from so I never really did BMX or dirt jumping. I've always kind of wanted to. Again, coming back to like the tricky side and like freestyle stuff. Like I was always a huge fan of I talked about NWD and like Drop MTB, like Nitro Circus. Like these are the kind of inspirations that hit me young coming into this whole scene. And so you always kind of look up to them, but it just seems so unattainable. And lately I've kind of tried to make the time, and like maybe with a little bit more of an adult mindset, like this whole trick stuff felt so out of reach. And when I did attempt it, it was like, like try a couple flips and stuff early on in the biking, had some big crashes and stuff, and just no technique and like feet off, hands off, but no structure to it all. This is long before I was coaching or anything. So now I'm seeing a desire from clients and kids to want to do that stuff. And I just see myself in them when I was like wanting to learn that stuff too. And I'm kind of satisfying my younger desire to learn tricks through that more disciplined approach, more professional approach to the coaching. And at the same time, it's great because I'm allowing myself to, through that learning process, deliver some of that to these kids who are like, they're just going to throw themselves off this stuff anyway, just like I did, and everyone's going to do it all the time. Your kids, you're kind of supposed to do that kind of stuff. But wouldn't it be great if we can kind of give them a little bit to feed off of, so that they're maybe not breaking themselves off, or like having good memories of that? Because like I did stop doing that kind of stuff in the first like year, and then just try to practice going down steeper stuff, faster stuff, harder trails. But the trick thing is like, forget about it. Until recently, where Lisa Mason, local to Whistler, who's been there for ages. She's such a huge proponent of the female mountain bike scene, has been for a long time. She's started something called Women's Mountain Bike or Women's Freeride Movement. Close friend for as long as I've lived in Whistler. She, for a long time, was trying to get an airbag into Whistler. She finally did it. It's awesome. And I worked with her this summer to try and build that up and get the scene going there. So having a lot of hours with the bag was kind of that, and having a Cro-Mag monk this year. Cro-Mag helped me out and got me a monk so I could ride. I kind of saved up some pennies to update my bike, and they gave me a good deal, and so I could try that kind of riding. Although basically
a dirt jumper style.
Yeah, dirt jumper. Yeah, sorry.
Right? Yeah.
So like, for the first time, I had kind of everything in all the ball in my court, or like I guess everything in my favor, to pursue this. So it was kind of natural. Everything was just kind of asking me to like, hey, now's the time. Like, let's. And instead of just kind of hurling myself into all of it, I took the time to like break down step by step. There was about 5 years ago or so, I had worked at the Air Dome. It was an indoor bike park, an indoor foam pit that was on Blackcomb Mountain. I'd worked there temporarily when I injured myself and couldn't coach. So that was like my first little taste of like freestyle mountain biking. But again, that was a lot of flinging myself. I didn't really know where to begin with it all, and I was just kind of watching people. But this is the first time I was methodically going about it, small baby steps. And just going back to your original question, I guess, is like finding the like little things that were a huge payoff. Like if it was just kind of pushing my toes down a little bit in the air, like it can move the bike like this, or I can take my hands off and get them back, and that was just like, felt like a lower risk. I'm hitting the ramp much slower than any ramp in the bike park or on my mountain bike. I'm not riding anything super exposed on a cliff edge. Worst case scenario with any of these tricks, even though you're spinning and flipping and hands and feet coming off, don't really get much more than like a twisted ankle or like a bruise or something, and then I'm back. It's not something that's like a season ender, which can often happen when I feel like I'm pushing things where, at least where I'm at with the mountain biking. So that was kind of,
yeah, fantastic, man. So much we could unpack there. I'd love to dive a little deeper and ask you, like, what is that process, or what is your process? Say, for example, I know you learned a Sui no-hander this year.
Yeah, I was
you're like,
on that. That was cool.
You're sitting there one day and you're like, hey, that would be a really cool trick. I think that's achievable. That's a goal I want to go for.
Yeah.
What steps do you put in between where you were and where you wanted to be?
So the first thing that I do is I am like obsessed, like obsessively watching videos, and not, when I say videos, I'm not like looking up how to Sui no hander. Like I might watch maybe a couple of those, but really it's like the clips that we all see, like part of an edit or something, or just kind of on social media, and it's usually part of like a bunch of other clips, and I'll pause and like hit every like frame by frame, and I'm watching. I'll focus on one part of their body for the, say like if we're talking about a Sui, I'll look at their hands from the moment they leave the lip to where they've landed it, and then I'll rewind and do it again, frame by frame by frame, looking at their feet, and again looking at their knees, all this stuff. So I've watched the same clip frame by frame for like an hour.
What does that give you? A visual representation that you remember, or like
I'm trying to like break it down, the more subtleties that people don't talk about, because I think what I found that I used to kind of try and watch the like tutorial videos and like talk to people who do them, but unless they're really great coaches, people who are doing them were kind of struggling to find a good description that would really speak to me, or kind of bring out the progress. And then in the tutorial videos, a similar thing where like they're great at what they're doing, maybe even great content creators, but it's just not, whatever it is, this or that, it's not quite speaking to me, it's not working. And so I kind of tried to like, I guess, coach myself in the way that I understand coaching. I'm like, maybe I could kind of do it for myself, even though this is a new kind of biking. And I'm just going to really watch every little thing. And so I noticed things that work for me, and I was trying to almost coach myself like I'm someone else, like third person.
Yeah.
But I'm watching the video and I'm like, hey, I'm going to hit this jump now, whether it's like, it's got to be like a consistent jump, like a mulch jump in Whistler or something, like, or set of dirt jumps that you just know the jump really well. And rather than like throw my hands off even a little bit, I'm just like I watch the video. I'm like, okay, his feet are doing it, and just the feet. My hands don't even come off. I'm trying. So effectively, this is the steps that everyone skips when you're trying to learn a trick. In this case, a no-hander. You're thinking about all the steps and taking your hands off, and you forget about everything else your body's doing. But it's like the no-hander. It's all about the pinch. Like if you can't pinch the bike, you're not going to want to take your hands off. And if you somehow do with no awareness on the pinch, it's not going to go well. Best case scenario, it'll look ugly and rusty and you'll feel very panicked in the process and you will pull it off, but it's not what you would hope to create. Like anytime anyone wants to learn these things, they want to like pull hands out, you know, and like be the dudes and girls that they see on screen, right? Like,
Totally.
and that's what you want. And so that's not going to satisfy. Sure, it's a step in the right direction, but that's sort of the most valuable thing I found is take the time to focus on the little things and put the mileage in on the little things before seeking that big extension. Like if you can find consistency on keeping the bike, at least with these aerials and stuff, like with you, and then go to extension and kind of style and just be patient with that process, you have a way lower crash rate and a way higher success rate. Like now I'll pinch it without even trying. Sometimes it's like I can hold the hands off with the right jump right up until the moment that my tires touch. I've landed with my hands off, and like if your pinch is good, you'll feel that, like you'll feel good about it.
That's fascinating hearing that process broken down. I love it. And one thing that stood out for me there is you talk about almost like explaining it as if you're explaining it to someone else, one of your students that you're teaching. Did you find taking that step back and kind of looking at the process and the learning from a third person perspective, did that help you not get attached to any feelings of like frustration or guilt or I wish this was sped up?
Yeah.
Did it help you be more compassionate towards yourself in that process?
Yeah, massive actually. Like that, it's I think there is a little bit of you kind of teach yourself to remove yourself from the process through trial and error, and you get better at it. I do feel like, especially if I'm trying something new and it's not going well, I'll stop trying it and go to something else that I know, just to kind of go back to that like fun factor. As soon as it starts to feel like work, you're gonna start getting frustrated, and there's 100% guarantee that like if you're frustrated on the drop-in, only two outcomes, and they're both negative, is you're not gonna get any kind of progress, or you're gonna hurt yourself, sometimes pretty bad, depending on what you're trying. So why even drop in frustrated? So it's like I'll switch to some other trick that I know, or even not even trick, but just kind of have fun with it again, and then maybe come back to it if it feels, or just put it off. A big part of how I've gotten better at that is actually like kind of a self-talk quietly that I do to myself. Is like, why aren't you providing what you do to your students and clients right now in this moment? I like kind of create a bit of an maybe a bit hard on myself, or like a bit like more accountability on myself. Like, hey, like catching yourself in the moment, because I definitely am guilty of like getting frustrated and not getting stuff. I'll like start yelling a little bit, or like I'll make sounds like that, like, you know, not screaming or whatever, but definitely getting frustrated and showing signs of it. And it can be a little embarrassing if you're at a jump spot or like a skate park or something like that, right? And so I've tried to get better about like little moment of like self-talk and like, hey, like, you know, you do this all the time. If I witnessed me right now as a client, what would I say to that person? And that's kind of that quick little check has been proving so valuable, and I'm trying to get better at it. Definitely getting better.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear you speak on that. I know it's something I've been working on as well. It's kind of like that self-reflection after each little step is ticked off.
Yeah.
So often we're focusing on the outcome or like a big goal, getting the no hands off and looking awesome at the third jumps. But what about like that day where you figured out how to pinch the bike, and that was like this tiny win that actually was huge in getting to the goal in the end?
Yeah, massive. Like we were talking about it today a little bit on the trails, is like the process, the little things, the nuances. I actually make a point in the coaching stuff. This doesn't even have to be tricks at all, but like, you know, because I don't really coach much of that stuff. It's not quite as big of a scene yet. Hopefully soon. It's mostly just stuff like, it's all product of the environment. Our trails are not, we don't have like perfect dirt everywhere. It's more about like rocky terrain, elevation and stuff. So it makes sense that we have more of this kind of enduro downhill style riding. And so not too much for the dirt jump crowd and tricks. But what I was going to say is that I do take the time to celebrate with clients and make a note, spend time like celebrating even the process of making the right decision, even if that decision is to like, hey, we're not going to do this. You know, we came into this plan, do this big thing. Maybe it's a rock slide, maybe it's a big gap jump. And somewhere along the way, we might have even prepared all season for this. So there's like a lot of hype about it, but also you're trying to create low pressure, and it just creates this like funny mental thing. And sometimes the win is there and it's great. That's what we all strive for. But those moments where it's not, it's so easy to fall into like a really emotional reaction to that. And you're like, this was my year, this is the thing, like we were supposed to get this photo, it could have been this new sponsor, it could have been like whatever, all my friends would have thought I'm awesome, or like if they're young, maybe that's the sort of thought process. I would make this great Instagram video. All that stuff is like in your brain and creating all this pressure and stuff. But it's like, I want to celebrate the times where you made the right call to, yes, not create the trick or the rock roll or the jump that would have done all that. But what you did do is you made the right call because it didn't feel right, and now you didn't break yourself off. You know, because you can come back the very next day, and now you're like, you did all that stuff that you aim to do.
Yeah.
All because you made the right call today.
Totally.
You know? And so I think I try to make a real effort to celebrate the walking away of stuff, as weird as that sounds. It's because it's a celebration of the correct decision making and the right mindset.
Sometimes it's like courage, isn't it? And that's
massive,
a skill in itself that takes repetition and takes work to develop. So it's like, hey, you just played courage today.
Massive.
That's the win. Yeah.
Totally.
I know you speak a lot in relation to your coaching around mental performance. I'd love to hear, what does mental performance mean to you in relation to mountain biking?
Mental performance. So what comes to mind when you phrase it that way, like, you know, there's definitely a lot more like mental stuff, awareness being brought into all sports, and mountain biking is no exception. And I love that. I've always been a big proponent of it. But mental performance, I feel like it's an ability to understand how your brain works, how you particularly respond to situations, and like kind of work the right techniques to be in the best position mentally, internally, to match your, you know, physical capabilities or what you set out to do that day. So, you know, I could be fit enough, strong enough, like theoretically understand how to do something enough to ride down, you know, that rock roll or hit that jump. But if, say, that day I feel like I've had some sort of personal issue that's been bugging me in my head, I've not had good sleep or something like that. Well, maybe sleep's more physical, but something's been bothering me, or personal, like relationship issues, family stuff, anything that has taken up a certain amount of my brain power or focus, it compromises everything else. And so I think the mental performance is recognition of that and understanding techniques and strategies to mitigate that, to perform your best mentally. To, like, for me, it can quite often be like, I'll visualize in order to get the mental part under control. I kind of developed a bit of a mantra to it. It's a sequential. It's a breathe, trust, and commit.
Dude, you just answered my next question. Yeah, let's talk about this.
Okay.
This is one that, sorry to cut you off.
No,
but
go
this
for
is
it.
one that you've inspired me, and I've used that on the trails.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good mantra. It hits a lot of important points. I'd love to hear you speak on it more.
Yeah, it came from just, it was kind of stuff. The whole breathe, trust, commit thing was a bit of just taking what was kind of coming up in the moment on these on any kind of skill development clinic and these programs, and some of the chats that we'd have on the trail side while we're doing this stuff, or afterwards at the parking lot, like whether you've done something huge or you've walked away from it, like it was in those chats that, or even on the trail side while I'm sort of pep talking or inspiring, trying to inspire people on these features. Those were some of the words that were coming up. And then I would also combine some of that dialogue and those ideas with some like journaling and what would become captions to like social media posts. And I started to see the same kind of words coming up, same ideas, and it was around like the breath, the trust, the commit. And the more time I spent thinking about it, it became like a sequential process. So I felt that like, and I started to really think about and pay attention, like, what am I doing? What do I witness other people doing? that gives them that optimal mental performance. And it's quite often what I found that's working is the breath is the start of it. And it's such a indication, like a good indicator of where you're at. Because you can tell yourself all you want, and you may even not even realize that you're being kind of in some way or another manipulated or infiltrated because you want something so bad. You're like, okay, yeah, I'm calm, like I'm good, I'm ready. Like there's so much pressure or different factors that you've created to make this needs to happen now or today or whatever. You're lying to yourself and you're not realizing it, that my breath's under control, and you're saying it like right, and you're like, but take a moment objectively and breathe and feel how you breathe. Are you breathing quickly, short, fast? So as soon as you can get to a place where it's like comfortable, calm, there's no denial that your breath is under control, you're good. That's the only way to then move into like, okay, do I feel ready? I feel like if you're making that process or asking questions about, am I ready for this feature? Do I feel good today? Until your breath is under control, the answers to those questions may be compromised.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like the first step there of the breath is awareness of where is my breathing at?
It is. It's you can't, it kind of calls you out, you know, the breath doesn't lie. So you can tell yourself you're ready, but if you're breathing and huffing like that, I feel like, and it may be a different process for others, but I found enough consistency in my own writing and others that I count on that, and it's the baseline.
I think breathing, it's a really interesting one, because like you say, everyone perhaps does it a little bit differently, and there's loads of different techniques we can look up online these days about regulating our nervous system by using the breath. So I always love to ask, like specifically for you, which ways work best for regulating your nervous system when you're out on the trails?
Yeah. Well, can we pause that question?
Totally, yeah.
Because I just want to go through the trust, commit, finish the mantra.
Okay, yeah. I'm digging in too deep here.
No, but do remember that question, because it's a good one. So I'll just speak to so the breath is the first step, so that that's your baseline covered. I can go through the process of tackling whatever it is that's my challenge today. So the trust part comes from like your breath's under control. Now it's time to think about the trust. It just helps relieve some of the doubts you might have, or the things that sort of creep in as just, do I have this? Like you start asking yourself, am I right? Am I making the right call? The trust helps, I think, alleviate a lot of that. And trust means that you're trusting yourself, that this is the time, this is the right day, you're capable of this, you're ready, this is the right time. I love it's good. The other trust is going on, that's like, I trust the feature has been built with this in mind, what I'm going to perform. It's not something like totally out of the ordinary. It's been done before, unless it hasn't, but it's most likely been done before. I trust my coach, if there's one there with you, or my crew today, that they're making the right calls and they're supporting me. All that is trust. I trust my bike is performing well. Like when you can take all those parameters and say yes, that's a like thumbs up. It just helps you, like, it almost like outsources some of the big job that needs to be done right now. It's not all you. Like you've got a team, and everything's helping you out to achieve that. And that helps me, at least, and I've seen it with others. Like take that on as a team of your bike, a team of your coach, a team of the trail builder, a team of you, all at one. And then the commit part is almost like a promise to the moment that you let off those levers and those wheels start turning, you have, or maybe it's the crossing of the line of commitment. It can be kind of both of those. You have already made the decision to seek it, to go the whole way through. Like that in itself is you making the commitment to finish what you've started. There is no slamming on the brakes once there. So it doesn't mean that whole breathe, trust, commit mantra needs to happen completely. There's plenty of days where I get to breathe and then I can't even get past that, or not even get to breathe. But it's such a great tool in that way, where it's like, unless you can get through all three with like conviction, then it's not the right day. You know, it could be an hour later where everything changes. It could be 10 minutes later I've watched it change. But you need to own it in that moment and follow through with that.
I love that process. It's such a sound order, because we can't commit without getting our breath under control first, or we shouldn't. And there's no trust there either if we're in either over alert state or under alert state. So we have to do it in that order.
Yeah.
So like breaking down the breath component even further, I know there's loads of different strategies. Really curious, how specifically do you use breath when you're out there on the mountain bike?
I wish I could speak more to it, because I know there are a lot of techniques and breath, like even breath workers, and you can go down the rabbit hole with that. So I guess it was probably in the last 10 years or so that I've kind of incorporated like meditation and mindful practices and awareness just into life in general. And then of course it kind of bleeds off into other areas of your life, and in this case it definitely came out in my coaching and my own approach to riding. But this day it kind of is just like a feeling of like, I know when I'm not quite breathing right or not. But what I do know with the breath part of it is that in moments where I have felt most kind of pushed in my riding, I won't even think about it to do whatever is coming up next until I can get, whether it's 10 breaths or 30, or put the right mindset in that creates the breath that's like, and you can feel it kind of through your whole body. At least this is my experience of it. I know I'm there when I can feel that I'm like kind of breathing into my extremities. I can breathe into my fingertips, into my toes.
So breathing in, to get that deep belly breathing, I think that's what, for me, really kind of triggers that relaxation response where I can think critically again about what I want to do.
Totally. And like people who do yoga and stuff know all about that, right? Like I've done some of that. Definitely not regular practicing these days as much, but yeah, like you can't move and stretch without the breath work. It's part of it. They're not separate. They're like symbiotic.
Yeah,
I guess is the word.
I know I've often heard like breath described as like the bridge between the mind and the body.
Yeah,
I think that's really true.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like a really intuitive process for you. Like you can feel when your breathing's right and that's at the right state for you to perform at your best on the bike. And then on the other end of the scale, you can feel when you're perhaps a little bit too heightened and you need to calm yourself down a little bit.
Definitely. Like even today, coming off of finding on some of those landings that it wasn't quite what you had anticipated. And so you're in that kind of recovery mode. There's a couple of times today I landed a little left of where I wanted to be, or like faster than we maybe should have been for that section of trail. And in that moment, like I'm sure the breath is heightened and things are tight, but those, like when we hiked up and did that, like, after looking at it, the first one on antithesis, like that when we greased it like real clean, that was very much like a breath thing. And actually now we're chatting about it, I'm thinking when I know a trail really well through and through, and you just know every little hit. Like I spend a lot of hours in the bike parks, probably where I spend the most hours working and riding. When you know every little berm or every little hole and pocket, it does become like exhale, inhale, exhale, and like with the terrain. It's pretty magic when you're riding something that you just know really well like that.
Totally. Yeah, like kind of getting into that flow state. I think breathing is a critical component, isn't it? We can't get into the flow state unless we're continuously breathing at a calm rate. I find, as well for me, sometimes when the trail becomes a little less smooth, maybe I'm casing jumps, maybe the speed's all over the place, often I've forgotten to breathe or I've started to hold my breath.
Totally.
So, if anyone wants to watch that ride and see what we're talking about, highly recommend checking that one out on YouTube there as well. Talking there about intuition and about breathing, I wanted to ask you this question because I've seen you post on intuition and how you use it to kind of read the trail ahead and almost feel the trail ahead. I'd love to hear you speak on intuition.
That kind of, when I think about that, it falls under the trust part of that mantra. Like trust that and it's funny to kind of dissect it, that because you're so in, we're talking like split seconds while you're riding along, but really it's moments or like a split second before you're making contact with a patch of terrain that you can see ahead of you. You create a bit of a bracing or a position in order to make best use of that terrain before you're there, right? Anticipation and intuition. That in doing that, I feel like there's if you do it with conviction and confidence, even if you've made a slightly wrong call in so you have an idea before you hit that patch, whether it's going to be slippery, sticky, steep, all that kind of stuff. If your calculations might be a little off, just having arrived with that level of conviction and confidence will kind of soften all that out to such a way that you're still gonna kill it, like you crush it.
Really? Yeah.
And almost more than you may have if you've nailed it completely, but it's more of like a straight lines way of thinking, and at least that seems to work better for me to create that like flow state kind of riding, and that's sort of how I think about the intuition. It's like making those calls that you know with 100% certainty this is the right call, even if later it turns out to be like a little off. It just works because you came in with that conviction.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for digging deep there. I love kind of dissecting this down to the finer details, and it's so interesting to hear, like, like that certainty of like, I'm 99.8% sure this is how it's gonna go, but if it doesn't, I know I'll be able to deal with it anyway.
Yeah, and that if it doesn't, it's kind of like it doesn't even come through. It's more like after the fact. I can see that it didn't, but it's almost one of those things where only you're gonna notice that. It's kind of thing like if you're a drummer, you skip a beat in a live performance, you can stop and like go, oh, and then regain yourself, or you can notice that and keep going and go like, that was silly, and you're right in there and no one ever noticed. That's kind of how I think about it. It's like I noticed, but I don't think most people do with those little nuances and things.
That's a great way of thinking about that. Man, I'm loving where this conversation is going. I'd love to talk a little bit about your coaching, because I know that's been such a huge part in what you've been doing for the last few years or more. Can you tell us, like, what was the story behind becoming a coach? What was the inspiration there?
So it's one of those things where you hear sometimes where like, whether it's your calling in life or the thing that like you're meant to do. I feel very much that way now, and it falls into that same way that other people who do what they feel like is what they're meant to do, how they got about it. It's like I was doing it before I knew I was doing it, or it was a thing. I remember, so me living in Whistler for the last like 16 years or whatever, I had worked in just about every job or industry you can think of. Just again, kind of like I like to dabble and try new things a lot. So before mountain bike coaching was a thing, I was definitely mountain biking a bunch. And in those jobs that I was doing, whether I worked at a coffee shop, a cab driver, all kinds of stuff, you'd meet all these coworkers and colleagues and new people and stuff, right? And like people rolling through town, and it's such a transient town. I was always the person at that like workplace that was, oh, that's the guy who bikes. So inevitably people are getting into whatever they're getting into in Whistler, like the party scene or snowboarding or mountain bike. They were like, oh, you getting into mountain biking? You should go ride with Mike. Like, he's so great at like showing you the ropes, and like he's so fun to ride with. For the first time, he has patience, he'll take time, whatever. And it was true. I loved it. I had so much fun showing people, and it was just more friends for me to ride with. It was great. And I did that for probably like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years, where enough people were like, dude, you're too good at this to be doing this as like just for fun, and like you have a job that's not this, like you need to be doing this. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I heard that enough times that I was like, maybe I'll just go look at like what that's all about, and just went about the whole certification process, and of course like fell in love with it. It was just like a natural thing. And even before I'd started working, I kind of had a couple of years of experience of just like, you know what I mean, just from taking people to the bike park or to trails and stuff.
Yeah. That's such a fantastic backstory, and you're definitely on the right path. I'm so stoked you found coaching. And like we were chatting a little bit about this on our ride, but I always like to ask the question, you've been doing this for what, like 5 or 10 years now?
Yeah.
What's one thing that stands out that you've learned from a student?
Yeah, I have learned from clients, well, many things, but one that's like as of recent or last couple of years is that like certain kinds of riding or styles of riding, because mountain bike can be so many different things these days, the ones that you kind of tend to brush off as like, oh, I don't like that kind of riding, or that riding stinks, or like that's stupid or silly. Because again, kind of throwing back to why we got into it in the first place. We were talking about how it was an expression, it was a fun, playful thing. So really, who's to say of like, this is mountain bike, this is not mountain biking, right? And so those ones that we like kind of brush off as like, this is stupid or silly, or I don't like this, or I'm not good at this, those are the ones that I've noticed that through clients that are good at the kinds of biking or little things within biking that I'm not good at, have kind of inspired me to like how can I make this fun? Because I can't figure it out. And you seem to be having a lot of fun with this. So like I try to be open-minded and objective, and it's like any kind of new biking. It feels like work at first, or it feels like challenging because it's a new thing. But if you get to enough through those little plateaus, I'm starting to understand like things like technical climbing can actually be really fun and rewarding. Getting over like a tight switchback with roots and stuff, or like a bit of a rock thing. I used to just step off and climb past all those things, or walk past all those things. And I do still do that a fair bit, but I'm definitely a little more open-minded to giving it a try at least, instead of just brushing it off. And stuff like that goes on for, you hear people talk about that with like skinnies, for example. We rode skinnies today.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's typically one of those things that people are like, oh, like, that's such a flow killer. It's so dumb. And like, why would you put that in the middle of a trail? You know, things like that. You might hear it, but it is really like so open to like, yeah, I'm definitely way more open to things that I might initially feel like, oh, that's not all that fun or rewarding kind of biking. Like, give it a chance or play with it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. I think, yeah, a lot of these things that are really hard at the start can be written off as like, I'm just no good at that, or that's just a pointless goal or something.
Yeah.
Skinnies is one of them, technical climbing. We were chatting as well. I've been working on my manuals lately, and that's been one for me that I just ignored for years because the barrier to getting good at it is just quite a big barrier, and it takes commitment, lots of time, maybe working through frustration, that kind of thing. But I do also think the fruit on the other side of these goals is so much more rewarding when we finally get it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can relate with some of the tricks you've been working on this year, things like flips, stuff like that, where like the barrier to entry is high.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Like, but like anything, like we were talking with the manual, it could be all anything kind of that kind of stuff. It's taking the time is probably one of the greatest lessons I've learned with some of those things that are like a measurable kind of maneuver that often tend to take the place of like, oh, you can do this with your bike. That means you're this level of rider, you know? And so the manual could be that, a backflip could be that, you know, no handers or Supermans, things like that. They can often like be a measuring stick, or people talk about or feel like that. But like, if you have that overcoming your idea of it, it makes it really hard to like grasp it. It's like take the little break it down into smaller slices, and then celebrate the little wins as you get more slices to that pie. And at the end, you get to eat that delicious pie.
Like pie. Words of wisdom.
Yeah.
Like that. I love it. You may have just answered the next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's one of the biggest mental challenges you see your students facing, and then what are some of the strategies or the tools you'll give them to help with that process?
It seems a little bit like almost a little too simple or too obvious, but one of the most common ones, probably the most common, is like a inability to truly believe that you're capable of it. A lot of like self-doubt, and like even in signing up to some programs or like going through the steps to get better, they're really kind of like, sometimes, you know, I'm probably not going to get my goal that I really want, but let's try. Or like, so you're already kind of selling yourself short a little bit. Or it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get there if you come in with that mindset than if you're like, okay, I can do this. These are the steps I'm going to do. And you kind of, again, with some conviction and own it. But quite often I do find that like a big part of what my job is and what I strive to do is to inspire their own confidence and belief that they can do it. Because and it's something that happens, it's funny, it happens differently with males versus females for sure. But like, I like to work with female riders more often just because, at least like typically, of course, we all break the mold, some of us, but like most of the time I'm talking female riders up and male riders down just to keep them safe. They're like, okay, like, well, like, I love where you're going with this, but like, let's break it down in smaller pieces if we're working with male rider. Female rider tends to have this idea that their own riding is here. In reality, I've seen enough examples that it's actually here.
Yeah.
And I've been working more with female riders just because I found that like that my style of coaching lends itself better to them, so it kind of just works really well. And I've noticed that pretty common struggle that people have is believing that they are where I see it. They've shown me enough examples, and I spend a lot of time explaining to them, this is why you're here. Like, so you're trying to tell me you're here. Here's how I can prove to you that you're here. And it might be describing things I've watched them do. writing things together and like, look, you can do this, you can do that. You got nothing. You're trying to tell me this? I'm calling you out. Like, you're wrong.
Totally.
And then they're like, okay, I guess I've just been conservative with, what I thought I was capable of. And
I think
it's a common one. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, self-belief piece I think is huge. So often writers will sell themselves short because perhaps they don't want to appear like, cocky or arrogant or anything like that. But without that self-belief piece, we don't have the belief to go and try new things.
Yeah.
And go after challenging goals. And it's in that process of trying new things that we build confidence, right?
Yeah. And just like in that bit of dialogue, it makes me think of like when I think about my own writing, the things that help me try to do some of those things that I feel like are really scary. I've made a conscious decision that I'm prepared to go down in the pursuit of this. Like I've decided that the win is worth the fail, the potential fail.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not like a permanent fail. It's just like a temporary fail in the process, and it becomes a step to that top. But that's what I think about when I think about like one of the things that were difficult for me that became something that I did a few times successfully this year was like a nothing air, where you guys no hands and no feet on. And that felt for a while like I know I'm not getting there because I'm not willing to like go bigger with the extension. It was kind of like these little open hands and feet were like still on the pedals. And then when it started to work, it was only after like, but right before dropping, being like, I don't care if I go down. And then it's funny in just that, it's like a liberation a little bit.
Right.
In that decision, you're not going to go down because you've done it with conviction or more reality. And that, of course, like you could fall in whatever, but you definitely open up your chances way higher if you can drop in with that breath, that trust, that commit, and you've kind of just accepted that like, I'm ready for any outcome.
Right.
I'm okay with all outcomes.
Yeah,
like,
so having the vulnerability and being like, I'm okay to fail at this. It's part of the process.
Totally. Like being open, not pressure on one outcome or another, just happy to roll the dice.
It's easier said than done, isn't it?
Massive. Oh yeah.
I've realized on a much smaller scale with my manuals, the reason I'm not currently as good as I'd like to be at manuals is because I haven't been doing them. And then breaking down that further and having some reflection, I realized the reason I wasn't doing them when I'm with all my other riding buddies that can manual, we're riding back from the trails down a perfect road, a perfect grade for it. It was a self-confidence thing.
Yeah.
It's like I was doing these tiny little manuals that weren't manuals, so I just wasn't doing them. But that in turn is the reason why I couldn't do bigger manuals. So It's been great this month committing to it and kind of being like, it's okay to suck at manuals.
Totally. And it's so valuable to surround yourself with other people in the learning process, especially if they happen to be learning the same things you are. So like right now, you and I coming down the road, we're pretty much in a similar place with our manuals, and it's great. It's so fun to like watch each other do it, and I'm still like very much trying to I've not been able to like lock it in. Definitely get those like little glimpses of that.
Yeah, it was cool watching you up in the balance point, and then we traded a couple of tools. I'm like, I'm thinking about the heels, I'm thinking about that.
Like that stuff is instrumental. Like it's definitely it's imperative. I think like you gotta surround yourself. Like right now, I'm actively seeking. Because it's not a very big community of dirt jumpers, but also who are not like too accomplished in it is nice if you can find them. Like finding other people who are learning what I'm currently learning really helps me out.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to have in your community, isn't it? People at a similar level to challenge you.
Yeah.
For sure, it's great to have people that are way better to look up to and perhaps people who are below you in progression to teach. But having that person that is at a really similar level can be super valuable.
Totally. Again, you kind of take it on as a team too. Like when you lose or when you win, it's incredible to like celebrate that together. And even when you don't quite hit the mark, you get to like relieve some of that disappointment in a smaller slice, and it's it's temporary, and you can kind of like pep talk each other through. It's like, it's all right, dude. Like you got that. Like like remember when I almost did that? Like you can do. Like well, we're both here. We're both doing it.
Yeah, it's so crazy, isn't it? It's only after we let go of that attachment of being good at something or, doing it perfect the first time that we give ourselves the opportunity to get better at it and perhaps make it perfect eventually.
Totally. So a friend of mine recently posted a post where it had like an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg was like epic slope style tricks or whatever, the part that's above the water. And then under the water, it had stuff like crashing, bike not working, injuries, and like it was just like this huge long list of like 5 years or whatever. And that's the truth. Anyone who looks amazing on their mountain bike, especially the ones who are like at the top of the industry and like posting like the best riding in the world, quite often we're not seeing all the stuff that's going on in that process. Like they're definitely spending plenty of time off their bike, plenty of time in despair of being without that and dealing with some real hardships. But it's just not all that sexy post to be putting up or attractive things. So and it's hard, and it can be really difficult. It's vulnerable spaces. But there's no doubt that everyone who's at the top of their game that's a part of the recipe. You work with that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like diving deeper below the surface, to go back to your analogy there, and thinking about, what work has gone in here to get to that end result.
Yeah.
Fantastic, dude. So something else you've been really active in the past 10 years or so is filmmaking.
Yeah.
Love you to, just start off by telling us a little bit about that.
So that came earlier, prior to any of the coaching stuff. So that was kind of like, it just so happened that the people that I had, I guess the first thing is like, I had expressed an interest in cameras and photo, video stuff. We used to like skateboarding and that. We'd always be getting videos and stuff because I just was watching skateboard videos all the time and I kind of wanted to make that. And I knew how to like edit a little bit. I had learned it a little bit in school, just basic iMovie stuff. And I had a lot of fun being creative in that way. So we used to just videotape ourselves skateboarding, and then I put some music to it and cut clips, and I'd be making the stuff that I really enjoyed watching in the skateboard movies. So I had like this old SLR camera when I moved to Whistler, and then I traded up for another one. Had a video mode, and I just, after like about a year of riding bikes, the first year in Whistler anyway, I started videoing our riding and making little edits and stuff. And it kind of just like, there was a real fanfare right off the bat. Like first it was just our little friend circle, and everybody's kind of like, oh, that was so sick. Like I like what you did there, or that was a cool clip, or this song really ties together. Like this is awesome. It's kind of the same way as I was kind of describing the coaching. It was kind of, I wasn't doing it to make films so much. It was kind of like a lot of times you hear it, you just film it to watch it yourself. And then you find that like there's a bunch of people who enjoy watching it from like an entertainment standpoint kind of thing. And this is before YouTube or any of that stuff. It might have been like the years where YouTube was just kind of becoming a thing, but the term like YouTuber was not something, right? Or any of that kind of stuff. So it was just for us, for fun, or whatever, right? But I put on Pink Bite and a couple like places like that, and then there was just this. It went from being just us and like friends commenting and stuff on it, to like there was people from other countries and stuff watching it and making comments and stuff. Oh, this is so cool and whatever. That paired with being surrounded by some other like real mountain bike arts people, photographers, videographers. They're kind of in a similar zone too. Some were a little bit like full on actual photographers, professional photographers and videographers, but most of the people that I was friends with were kind of in a similar place where they were like super creative, submitting some films maybe to this little film fest or this or that, and we were all kind of like learning it together, and it was exciting. So I had a fortunate position where most of my friends were a little bit further along there, or professional photographers, and I got to learn a lot of stuff. I never went to any kind of like photography, videography school or anything like that, professional training. I was just hanging out with people who were that, and it was very interesting to me. The colors, the composition, the like creating the feeling that I have on my bike through the lens was always the goal. Like I was kind of just like, oh, I love it so much. I wish everyone can feel it. If they can't go out and ride, I wish they like maybe this is a way that they can kind of feel it. So that was always kind of the goal with the edits and stuff that I put out, putting out stuff that like I want to watch, you know?
Yeah, I love that organic process, and it really shows in what you're doing. You're driven by what you love rather than what's cool or what other people want.
Yeah.
You know, going after the things you love, and if other people like them along the way, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's usually how it goes. Yeah, you get surprised that there's other people like seeking out the same stuff. And
and it was cool kind of, I guess, seeing the crossover between the coaching and also the filmmaking in one of your films called Rascals.
Yeah.
Some 7-year-old little rippers in Whistler.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that project.
Yeah, that was, so like prior to that one, that would probably be the most recent. it was a bunch of little like edits and stories. There were some travel mountain bike films that we did. We went to Peru, went to New Zealand. I went with like very close friends and professionals in the industry, Steve Story and Justa Jeskova. They are accomplished like filmmakers, photographers, and Steve's like a media athlete. So I learned a lot just riding with them and filming with them, traveling with them. And then a bunch of edits that we had done for fun around town and traveling through BC. But the Rascal Squared, that film was the first time since coaching where I kind of did blend those two worlds. It was always something since I started coaching that I had in the back of my mind. Like you spend all these years riding with kids especially, but even like anybody, I kind of wanted to capture some of that process. And these kids were kind of the perfect story, because it was funny and cool that they were like, it was a bit of a added element that they're twins as well, so it's kind of, they're the same age, same size, right? So that's kind of fun. But above all, the biggest appeal or like draw to create that project was this is the first time that I'd come across kids that young performing that well. And I was kind of new to the DFX side of things. That's the kids coaching program in the Whistler Bike Park there, for the first time. So that, you know, there's always been very talented kids, but we were reaching this threshold in that era and now where kids as young as like 8 kind of ish, we're seeing kids do things like A-line and like Dirt Merchant even, and there's a lot of factors there. But yeah, so just in that coaching, witnessing this every day, and part of that filmmaker brain going like, there's a story here that I really want to tell. It was a very interesting project because I had to run a quadruple role kind of like babysitter, because these kids are young enough that like you kind of playing some role there where you got to take care of them, whatever. Filmmaker, coach, like all at the same time. And I was one guy setting up a GoPro here and like, stop fighting with each other, and like, you know, yelling that kind of stuff, and like setting up this angle. And another part of that project was like the kids. So I'm not gonna, you know, if we didn't get the shot or something's out of focus, I can't be like, hike up again, let's do, it's crazy, right? So it was super unique, cool project. The parents were like super supportive and into it. Like, of course, I checked with the kids first and pitched it as an idea, and the parents, to make sure they were into it. And these two were like so keen. They're like all about it, right? So yeah, they're the perfect kids for that project, and it really was really a lot of fun.
Oh man, it's such a cool project. I know for me it was the first time seeing kids ride at such a high level at such a young age, and I think a lot of people outside of that kind of Whistler bubble community were just mind blown by that video. And I talk about technology and wearing a lot of different hats. I know right at the start you're there kind of talking to the kids on a walkie-talkie as you're like, you know, 100 feet away filming them. It's such an interesting concept, and I think so impressive that you pulled it off as a one-man band.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but just super, like, again, open to all outcomes. I didn't really care too much if it was, you know, the big spectacular most epic film ever, or if it was just like a fun little edit that like we get to have, you know, like me and the kids and their parents and stuff, and we get to have this cool thing. I was open to all outcomes, and then we put it into the VIMFF and as well as Whistler Film Festival. It was really cool to put it on a stage with other filmmakers, like even beyond the mountain bike world. I got some great feedback and people loved it, and yeah, it was just a great opportunity to showcase what these kids are doing, what us as coaches in the bike park with young kids get to see all the time. That you can talk about it all day. You take like phone clips and GoPro clips and try and talk about like this magic that's going on out there. But if you can pull it off with some nice cameras and good lighting and that really show what it looks like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it did. It's fantastic. Really, really recommend everyone goes and checks that out. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Cool. Thanks.
Man, this has been an awesome conversation. I think a great way to wind it up. I love to ask the question, these days or today, what does the perfect ride look like for you and why?
Perfect ride. The perfect ride is, it's all about feel, and like, you know, you hear it often, it's kind of cliche, but the reality is that, right? Like, if you're just with the right people, the right energies in the air, and like the weather happens to be good, the trail conditions are great, and you wind it up with like campfire or something. Like, I do like to ride. Yeah, the perfect ride is pretty far from any kind of town, I think. Like, it'll usually be whether it's in the Chilcotins or something like a little more remote, or I don't know, like Kamloops or something like that. Like it's still a town nearby, but away from paved roads a little bit, feels a little Wild West, and you're with the right people. Couple airtime moments, those are all kind of like the right elements to great time. It's largely to do to the social side of it, or the right crew, you know. It could end up being a trail that doesn't have anything huge on it, but you just feel like you linked everything up and I kind of together, like hollering behind each other, woo! And kind of like what we did today, actually. It was sweet.
Yeah, party laps with good people, hey? Connection to nature, connection to people. I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, we've talked about all kinds of things today. There's been so many nuggets of wisdom I've taken away. Yeah. But if you could send our listeners away with just one thing to remember on the next ride, what would it be?
Just be sure you're having fun. You know, sounds simple, but really, like, all too often it's like get caught up with this or that, or why, like, have fun. That's why we're doing it. Super playful, just not hung up on any results, and yeah, go play on your bike. It's so rad. I love it.
Fantastic, man. Yeah, what a note to end it on. Before we do that, is there any sponsors, industry partners, projects you'd like to mention?
Katrina Strand has always been super rad in being creative with some programs and kind of collaborating with her on some stuff. Always love working with her. Strand Training. Definitely getting some great bikes from Transition has helped out this year a lot. Like I kind of have I have kind of the setup that I'd always been after. It's like I like to be very playful and hit bigger gaps occasionally. It's like pretty fun, and so having that like big travel mullet setup's really cool. I went for 2 trail bikes this year because working in and outside the bike park, it's kind of nice to have a bike that can do both, and also like be good at both. If I have a downhill bike and that bike goes down and I'm working in the bike park, now I've got to sacrifice my trail bike, and then vice versa. Trying to like trail ride on a downhill bike is kind of impossible. So if I blew up my trail bike and I had to work the next day, so that was kind of where it came from this year. I have the Sentinel and the Patrol, and they're kind of similar, but they're different enough. I upped the travel on this one on the front, and it's just a beast. It's awesome. So Transition's great. Noon has been a new one this year. I can't even tell you how many times like I would not have gotten through the day if it wasn't just the hydration bit to it. Like you can drink water all day, but it's different if you got like a little bit of something in there. So having that on board this year was awesome as well. They're super cool. Thanks, Noon. And Lisa Mason with her airbag and WFM bike, women's free ride movement is just, she's the best. She's made it so great for anyone in Whistler who wants to like try things and feels like some of that stuff we're talking about is kind of unattainable or just don't even know where to begin. Having her in her airbag has made my own riding incredible, has made it easier for me to explain things to other people who are curious about learning and stuff. And I've just been so like excited to watch that grow and continue to like develop into something bigger and better. We've been lacking that kind of freestyle training location anywhere in the Sea to Sky for mountain biking, and I'm so stoked to see it start with things like Lisa's bag. So Lisa Mason, I'm a huge proponent of the WFM bike. For sure.
Really? Yeah, such good work. That's another person I'd love to have on this podcast.
Yeah.
In the future. Man, talked about so much here. Where can people find you and follow along with these adventures online?
The majority of what I share and what's going on with me is all on Instagram for the most part. I'm not really on too many others. So I'm msoosa.mtb, msousa.mtb on Instagram. It's where you'll find the most. Link to my website on there.
The filmmaking stuff's on YouTube at the same handle, right?
The filmmaking stuff is on Michael Sousa Cinema on YouTube. It's kind of scattered a little bit, but if you're on my website, michaelsousa.online, then you see it all. Like all the videos, everything like that, the coaching, it's all in one place. So that's kind of the place to be.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming down to Squamish today, coming for a fantastic ride with me, and then sitting down for this conversation.
See, grateful for the opportunity. Great times on bikes, great people, great weather. Can't get better than that.
Can't complain, hey?
You.
Thanks so much, dude.
Cheers, dude.
Right, go and watch the ride video on my YouTube. Strongly recommend it. What's up, guys? Just one more thing before you hit the trails. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear from you about any topics or any particular episodes that you enjoyed, and even about any guests that you'd like to hear me have on the show in the future. You can find me on Instagram at the_mind_mountain. This podcast, mountain biking, and mindset are all things that are very close to my heart, so I feel super grateful to be able to share these conversations with you. So much love to you all for taking the time to listen. I'll see you next time.